Welcome you to this first in our Monday evening speaker series here at St. Francis Retreat Center. And it's a real pleasure for me to introduce to you our speaker this evening, Brother Don Bisson. And he'll be speaking on the topic of transpersonal hope. Brother Don is a religious Marist brother. He lives in the Bronx. And one of his primary ministries is training spiritual directors, and he has a rather large spiritual director practice of his own. For over 30 years now, Don has been a very significant participant in looking at the way we go about forming religious men and women. He is a Jungian psychologist, and if you go to his website, you'll find that he has audio recorded over 70 lectures that he's given. And oftentimes the primary content of those lectures is his bringing psychology and spirituality together in such a way that it fosters a more contemplative way of living in our world today. And I'm sure you'll agree with me by the end of his lecture that he really believes that developing a more contemplative way of living is the only thing that's going to get us through this very dark night for our global family, as well as our universe. So many of you I know have heard his voice, but have not seen his face. So this is an opportunity for you this evening to put the voice and the face together. So Don, a very warm welcome to you, and I'm going to let you take it from here.
Well, welcome, Father.
Brother. Oh, there we go.
Okay, is that all right now? Okay. Welcome, everybody. And I can say, from the basement of a building in the Bronx, I come to you after just having a huge electrical storm, which I was afraid we would lose power. We lost power yesterday for 3 hours, so I was hoping this wouldn't be another power outage, but thanks be to God, we're on. I'd like to begin with a psalm that is probably the most frequently used psalms at the beginning of a retreat. That is Psalm 136, because it speaks about light and darkness. O Lord, you have searched me and know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down. You are acquainted with all my ways, even before a word is on my tongue. O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in, behind and before, and lay my hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's so high that I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle in the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand hold me fast. If I say, surely darkness shall cover me, and the light around me becomes night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. For it was you who formed my inmost parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb, and I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, that I know very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. your eyes beheld my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them yet existed. How weighty to me are your thoughts, O God, how vast is the sum of them. If I tried to count them, they are more than the sand. And if I came to the end, I would still be with you. I sent out some notes on darkness and hope, which I hope you were able to get and either download or follow, just so that it might make the lecture a little bit more logical for you if you wanted to follow some of the main themes. And I know I'm a visual person. I like notes that I can follow and kind of connect with what the speaker is speaking of. So in a little while, we will begin to use those notes. I just want to do an introduction first to the theme. First of all, many of you know my work either through being together at Memkin or through the contemplative circles or through various other means. But just to say, as what Father mentioned, there are 4 aspects of my life that weave together in all of my presentations. Whether it's a lecture or whether it's a retreat or whether it's a training program, there are 4 things that are interwoven. The first is that I am a practicing Christian. I have been in my whole life. Christ, the image of Christ and Jesus is the center of my experience of what it means to be a spiritual person. So I use Christ language because this is what I experience, how I experience the spiritual path. Secondly, for 40 years, I've been studying Jung. And in that 40 years, I've done 40 years of personal dream work as spiritual experience. So I'm a firm believer that the spiritual life in a contemporary way must be informed, shaped, reformed by conversation with the unconscious. That the unconscious is the source of not only darkness, but light. And if we want to find hope, it's going to be through the inner journey of plummeting various forms of darkness to discover the light. The third aspect is that for all of my adult life, I've been a spiritual director. And I've been a spiritual director for people of every age group, sexual orientation, men, women, and even to this day, I have directees from the ages of 25 to 90. So the whole spectrum. So I think I have a pretty good handle on the human condition. Thomas Keating's little book on the human condition is such a wonderful description that really the human condition is the mystery that we're dealing with. But the fourth aspect, which is not always present, is that I've spent nearly over 25 years of my life in American inner cities, in Oakland, California, in Chicago, in New York, in Manhattan, and now in the Bronx. The 47th precinct, which I live in at the present moment, was the zip code that was most hit hard in New York City by the pandemic. In the month of April, during the shutdown, there was no traffic whatsoever. And all we heard were emergency vehicles because 5 blocks away is Montefiore Hospital. So we heard, for months, this emergency around us. So I'm very aware of the fact that, there are other parts of the country, including, I think, South Carolina now, that are being hit with the reality of the pandemic. So the context of talking about hope has to be within the context of our human condition, personally and collectively at the moment. And, and what's incredible that, from week to week, things are changing so fast that the introduction to the talk last week, I had a dump for the introduction of the talk this week, because things are changing so quickly. And what we have to ask ourselves is, what is the synchronicity, this providential coming together of all of these powerful movements at one time in history? I mean, we're dealing with such powerful global situations all happening at the same time. We have this global pandemic, and last week, Siberia and the Arctic was burning with 95 to 100 degree temperatures. So global warming is not an issue. It is an immediate threat. We're living with all of this breaking down of systems and of the organic relationship. So we have to ask the spiritual question, what is the meaning or the epiphany of this synchronicity of all of these events globally happening at the same time? Is this an invitation for us to wake up? Is this a time to find not optimism, but authentic hope? Is this a time to go deeper into the human experience and to say, this can be a shifting, not only for the present, but a reorientation for the future? And I'll say that, broadly speaking, so many of my directees feel that their entire lives have been preparing for this moment. That everything else has been in anticipation of this moment. And it raises the ethical question of, where is my role? What is my role? What is my place in this situation? So, we all know the difference between Chronos time and Kairos time. Chronos time is the ordinary everyday schedule. And I presume all of you, your Chronos time has been disturbed. There was one day in April that I canceled 7 flights on United. It's like ordinary time is over. The calendar, my calendar that I live on was useless. What am I planning for? I'm going to be in this basement for months. All of a sudden, Chronos time is evaporating. And Kairos time is a liminal time in which I don't know what's going to happen. There is no crystal ball. What will happen to St. Francis Retreat House? It's an unknown. We don't know yet. I don't know what my schedule is going to be like. I don't know we don't know how school's going to open in September. We just don't know. Now, for people that live very much with control all the time, this is a very challenging moment, because we have no control over anything. And you can see the battle going on, right, within states and within, like who's going to tell me what to do versus what do we have to do? What's my personal liberty and what's our collective responsibility? All of a sudden, I think we're being asked as a culture to grow up, and there's an enormous resistance. So Kairos is a disturbing time. It's meant to be disturbing. because you don't change unless you're disturbed. The only way to really change, and so when we talk about the transcendent function, transformative hope, that has to come from a moment in history where I'm not in control, where I've been, shattered in terms of my perceptions of who I am and what I'm called to be. So at the same time that the pandemic is running across, we have the whole revolutionary concept that we are re-examining our personal and collective mythologies. This whole thing about statues and whatever, we're taking an assessment of like, what does this really mean? What's the significance of this? The couple of times that I've been at Memkin, I'm always so tangibly aware that that was a plantation, so aware of its history. I was so moved by going to the slave burial ground, across from a field of cotton. That's so moving to recognize that we're still in the midst of resolving and healing and transforming our history. If you would have asked somebody in Mississippi just 3 months ago that they were going to change unanimously their flag and that it would pass both houses and signed into law, nobody would have believed it. And yet in 3 months, there was this enormous shift. That's what liminality does. It erupts and changes the landscape. When you are having a dream and there's a tornado, an earthquake, a tsunami in your dream, this is the awakening moment that everything from above and below are now shifting. And don't think that life is ever going to be the same again. This is a very important but what's happening this time is, it's happening not only individually, it's happening collectively. So I'm not just going through it myself. My neighbors and my friends are going through it either in resistance or in attraction. Something has stirred all of the waters. The economic sufferings is changing our reality, and we're realizing who's really suffering from the pandemic and from the economic collapse. In our local parish here, which is African American, Jamaican, Nigerian, Hispanic, Filipino, we had a food bank that on a normal Friday would give out maybe 90 boxes. Last week, there were 400 boxes given out. I mean, you've got thousands and thousands of people that are really on the edge of survival. These are hard times. And we're not even going to talk about our politics or what's happening from the top down, but the reality of it is that as a people, we're getting fatigued from division. We're getting fatigued by ripping apart. And you know what I noticed with my directees, and probably in your own lives, little things are more stressful than ever. From having to plan to go out with your mask and your preparations, to not visiting a loved one in a nursing home because you're disconnected, from not being able to travel to see somebody that you miss, not being able to work, or for younger parents, maybe your children and grandchildren I have one directee who's about 38. He's on the computer with me on Zoom. His wife is a teacher, and she's on a computer in her classroom, and their two kids are each on tablets doing class all at home. The stress level was unbelievable a few weeks ago, you know, when the kids were still in school. I mean, the stress level of trying to coordinate education, you know, work. I mean, the darkness, the exhaustion, right? So this is the context that we're talking about hope. In this mix, in this reality, with these entities all happening at the same time, we need to talk about hope. But what I want to say is, hope is not a given. No, it's not everybody gets the hope. We have to prepare and be able to receive hope, because hope is not something I can create. Hope is basically an entity of a gift from another dimension. I can be optimistic, but that's not the same as hopeful. I can be optimistic that, you know, the stock market might go up. That's ego optimism. That's not hope. You don't put your hope in things or in people. The only thing that hope gives us some sense of that there's a bigger picture. That's why I use Psalm 136. 136 basically is, you know, wake up to the reality that you are a part of a much bigger thing. That God knew you before you were even created. Hope comes from a radically different perspective. It's not an ego-centered reality. I saw a quote from an author the other day who's an Indian Carmelite. His name is Father Justin. He said, "At this juncture, there's only one thing which is certain. The human consciousness and our way of living cannot go back to where it was 3 months ago." So this is like, if you want to turn the clock back 3 months, you can't. That world and that reality is now over. Now, the forces of regression and the forces of denial would want us to turn the clock back and say, it really isn't much. It doesn't really impact us. It hasn't changed us. In my belief system as a spiritual director, I see those voices as not only the voices of denial, but the voices of evil that does not want to take the energy for potential transformation and radical change and move it backwards. In this introduction, I want to share a dream that a directee shared with me a few weeks ago. And with her permission, I got her to agree that I could use her dream anonymously. Because I think the dream is not only a personal dream for her, but it has a collective theme that applies to our situation today. This is the dream. In the dream, it's midnight on Christmas Eve. There is a preparation for the singing of the proclamation right before the lights go on. So she has Christmas and Easter together. I am with others trying to light the candles throughout the sanctuary and around the church. As we try to light the candles, I observe that people can't keep their candles lit. They're moving around so much that the candle seems to go out. I realize it and I start going slower. I also see candles that are too old with no wick and are very hard to light. End of dream. I think this dream situates us at this moment in history. It's midnight. It's not the old day. It's not the new day. It's the witching hour. You know, midnight is the moment where transformation takes place. Something is over. Of course, it's at a Mass, and Christmas, it's the birth of the divine child. This is radical liminality. We are not in what we were before, and we're not yet developed from what we are now. We're on the cusp. Darkness still holds us in power. But there were a few souls that have been commissioned to go to the candle, receive the light of Christ, and to spread it around the church. I would dare say that many of you in your little boxes that I see are candle bearers in your communities. That in your struggle of conflict and issues and struggle, you have this little flicker of light in the darkness. And you may be called to sharing it with others. This is the light of hope that comes from Christ in the darkness. But there are two major obstacles for people to get the message. One is they can't keep their candles lit because they're moving around too much. They cannot be still. They cannot receive. They cannot wait. And the second issue is the candle that they have, it's too old. It's not appropriate anymore. The wick is burnt out. You need to get rid of it and find a new candle. Hope demands two kinds of receptivity. As you are given the light, the first is you need to center yourself and be able to receive that light. Hope, though it comes from God, I believe come from other people. It's not a direct message from God. It's oftentimes what is called hope providers. Who is the hope provider in your life that carries light and wants to share it with you so that then you can share it with another? Who are the hope providers? Who are the men and women incarnators of light and hope in the midst of this dark moment? The darkest part of the night. This magical thinking, oh, everything's going to work out, has nothing to do with hope. That's magical thinking. The moral dilemma for most of us is, how do we receive the hope when it's available? If you were secure and had no anxiety and no no reality of darkness, then it wouldn't be hope. It would be ego satisfaction. The unknown is yet to be discovered, but with your candle lit, you may have a better path to follow the designs of God. Jung says, by consciousness, I understand the relation of psychic context to the ego, insofar as this relationship is perceived by the ego. Relations to the ego that are not perceived as such are unconscious. Consciousness is the function of activity which maintains the relationships of psychic ego contents to the ego. My ego has to be willing to choose hope. I have to make a choice. And hope only exists in darkness. You know, when the mystics speak of the dark night is the place where the mystical marriage takes place. The dark night is where the soul is being seduced to trust in levels that they have never trusted before. Now, Carl Jung, on August 12, 1942, one of the darkest moments in world history, the Nazis has taken over almost all of Western Europe. Europe was locked down with the Germans had taken over. The Germans were at the gates of Stalingrad looking like they were going to take over Russia and end the war. He wrote a letter to a pastor friend of his, and he said, is there still a chance? Now this is in your notes. Is there still a chance to save ourselves from this spiritual decay? Yes, but a miracle will have to happen. And miracles only happen when one believes in miracles. In other words, hope does not exist unless you trust enough to believe that there is such a thing as hope. He says small islands like mountaintops would have to grow out of the chaotic sludge. Islands of contemplation and a sense of justice. Perhaps a new world will develop from these islands. I know of the wonderful work that happens at Memkin Abbey and their creating of these contemplative communities that are attempting to be islands of contemplation and a sense of justice in the world. What we find is that we're still not integrating yet the post-Holocaust understanding of morality. Erich Neumann, this is in the next page of your notes. Erich Neumann was analyzed by Jung. He went to Israel in the late 1930s before the war broke out. And he wrote a book in 1948 called Depth Psychology and a New Ethic. And basically what he said was the old ethic of just being good people and following the commandments were not strong enough to beat off Nazism, communism, and all of the horrendous darkness that existed in Europe in the 30s and 40s. Because he said, we were unawakened, unconscious. We identified ourselves as being good. And by doing so, we had to create an enemy outside of us. And there are 4 quotes here. And I'm going to make some comments on each one of these. The problem with politicians. Now remember, this is written in 1948, so don't read too much into, how this is very old but very new. He says, from the point of view of the new ethic, the moral inadequacy of a politician does not reside in the fact on the conscious level he is not a morally acceptable personality, though there is no guarantee that he would be that either. It is in his total unconsciousness of the shadow and the illusionary orientation of consciousness that accompanies this kind of unawareness, which is the decisive and often enough the fatally decisive factor. The only person who is morally acceptable in the eyes of the new ethic is the person who has accepted his shadow problems. The person, that is to say, who has become conscious of their own negative side. Because if you are in charge of power and you say you have no negative side, then everyone else has to carry your shadow for you. And therefore, you don't say anything truthful, you're only saying the projection of who you are onto somebody else. This is the problem with politicians. 1948, post-Holocaust. And there's also this danger of a clear conscience, she says. Any nation who is possessed by the inflation of a good conscience knows itself to be identical with the highest virtues of humanity. In fact, it identifies its God as the undiluted quintessence of the light side, who is, of course, duty-bound to award its victory. But the inflation of the good conscience is not in the slightest degree disturbed by the acting out of a bestial shadow. The more innocent a culture sees itself as not having a shadow, the more bestial is its own projection and behavior, because God is always on their side, no matter what they do. You see what the issue is here? The issue is not, did you follow the rules? But the issue is, obedience is not the highest quality of the new ethic. Discernment is the highest quality. And Pope Francis has made that clear as a Jesuit, that it's not obedience to the rules that's most significant. It's the discernment and choice-making and consciousness of the soul that's the most important. Ethical duty. It is required of us that we should work through our own evil in an independent and responsible way. But the corollary of this is that becoming conscious now must rank as an ethical duty. It is appalling to watch human beings, whether individuals or whole nations, being hollowed out from inside and devoured by the lie, which is concealed in repression and its fatal unwillingness to look reality in the face. One of the greatest blessings of the last 3 months is that it has put light on our collective shadow. Who is dying at a higher rate? Why are they dying at a higher rate? Why are the police behaving in the ways that they are? All of a sudden, our innocence of who we think we are has been revealed. That our health system is staggered with the fact that if you are wealthy, you have the best health in the world. And if you are poor, you don't have any access to preventative health. and you are most liable to die from the pandemic. These are all objective facts now. And there is this wild attempt to put the old mythology right back on top of the old horse. And I think we have to see this. I believe that this is a tremendous moment of grace. Because when our shadow is revealed to ourselves, this is when we can collectively make changes. When our shadow is revealed, our better self, our best self now has potential. And this battle is going to go on for a long time, maybe beyond my lifetime. But this battle is very important, that those of us who have been in the spiritual life and the spiritual journey for a while recognize that there's an unwillingness to put on the dark mask again. So every time I own my shadow and do my shadow work, I withdraw that energy from the collective. And that means the collective begins to deflate in its ability to hold on to the old. Towards the end of the last quote, where it starts with "so too," if you're following with your notes, it says, "So too, he or she now encounters the divine itself in a human form." That is to say, he experiences it not in the absoluteness of the abstract or of an infinity without content, but in the relative finitude of a real revelation within the human realm, the voice. And I want to underscore here the voice. There is within us a deeper voice than my ego. And it may come in a dream, in a revelation, in a synchronistic act, through the voice of another human being. At some juncture, most of us hear a message, a voice. And this voice is waking us up to the reality that we all have the capacity of and the reality of an intense relationship with God. That God, who is dwelling within us, awakens. This is the awakening of the voice. And you notice the voice here is capitalized. That is not the voice of the ego, it's the voice of the self, which I'll mention in a minute. So let me just say that hope is an experience, it's an encounter. I encounter hope. I don't possess it. Like I don't possess the Holy Spirit. I have an encounter with hope. And through that encounter, I create, secondly, a dialogue with hope. I create a bridge, a link. And then I discern that voice as to what and who I am called to be. And fourthly, and very importantly, hope only is hope when it's brought to action. Hope is not an internalized only event. Hope becomes action. Now, some of you may be familiar with Constance Fitzgerald, a Carmelite sister who wrote a very important paper many years ago that's still available online called Impasse in the Dark Night. Usually I think of impasse as a negative event, that I have no choice. I've been thrown into it. Impasse, and I just want to say this, these quotes because we're running out of time and I want to give plenty of time for dialogue. Impasse is that there's no way through it or around it. There's no rational escape. I don't know what it's going to mean to hang in there. There's no escape. There's only the reality that I'm in. Impasse destroys logic, destroys my mental capacity to figure things out. Impasse is devastating to the ego because it's no exit. I'm stuck in this place. And it's usually associated with all the dis words: disenchantment, disappointment, disagreement, hopelessness, loss of meaning. The irony is, impasse is the birthing place for hope. I've seen this at times with an individual who, towards the end of their life, recognize that there is no exit to the fact that they will die. There's no more optimism about chemotherapy or a new treatment or whatever. There's a critical moment there in which I've noticed there are two paths. One path is the path of denial of reality and living an illusionary exit, or there is the human experience of impasse in which there is no exit except facing the reality of death. And that impasse can actually be a birthing place for hope, to be in touch with something transformative, transpersonal, beyond the ego, transpersonal hope, beyond the ego. Then all of a sudden I'm awakened that I am part to a larger mystery, and my death is not failure, it is not the end, it is something mysterious and transformative. I knew a Jesuit in California that I worked with, Tom Hand. He was a Zen master and had worked many years in Japan. And he had worked through this. So at the end of his life, the last conversation I had with him, he was a fascinating man. He said, "No, I don't want to die, but in a way, I'm looking forward to experiencing it because I've never done this before." And that was such a wonderful way of saying, I've never done this before. I don't know what it's going to mean, but I know it's going to mean something. And from all of his inner work, he knew intuitively that there was something beyond this that was still going to engage him. He looked at death as an adventure. And I had somebody one time in hospice in which 5 minutes before he died, he was on the phone talking to somebody about flying to Florida. Two different paths. One that was in denial till the very last breath, and the other one as if he was going to Cape Canaveral and he was going on a trip and this was going to be the adventure of a lifetime. One was hopeless, one was filled with hope. That is both gift and choice. But we have to go through the darkness of impasse. There's a whole list of things there that I have given you to give you some hints of how do you reorientate your life to get in touch with transpersonal hope. And this is from Jungian insights about our collective future. The right brain is the source of our capacity to meet hope. It's not left brain. The left brain, which we use all the time with our thinking processes and with our responses to linear thinking and planning and achieving and success, okay? We as a species, and especially we as Westerners, have really overdeveloped that capacity, that left brain capacity. But what happens to us is that when we're in impasse, when we're in darkness, when there is no exit, I have to go to the right brain to respond to impasse. Because the right brain is not so fixated on solutions as well as creative expressions of a reality. Whereas the right brain says, let's look at this whole thing from a different viewpoint. The right brain says to my directee, it's Christmas Eve. Don't you say? It's Christmas Eve. You're at the cusp. You have some choices to make. Okay? The right brain gives us symbolic language to give us meaning, not solutions. That there's a purpose. So I listed 15 things here, and we could spend an entire day on this. And one of the workshops that I did do, if this really interests you, this area, one of the workshops you can get on MP3 is on the collective dark night and hope. That might be, if you want a fuller, expansive view of this area, this collective dark night, I spend a lot of time with. But just to kind of give you a sense that we have to reorientate ourselves in the right brain to say that the inner world is as valid and as massive as the outer world. That the universe within is as large and as mysterious and needs to be discovered. I have to retrieve a sense of rootedness, trusting in nature, in my nature, in the nature that God created. I have to work with materials from the unconscious. Like, have you ever had the experience in which you were like really down or disorientated or hopeless, and you were talking to somebody, it could be a friend, a family member, and they just say a word or a phrase in such a way that it hits you like a 2x4. And you say, now I just got something. I don't even completely understand what I got. But I got something that I have to return to, because God is like, the door is locked and we're being thrown keys all the time. Except we don't notice. We just go and check that the door is locked, but there are keys all around. Where are the keys? Taking up the task of individuation. One of the things that I notice, and what the world is noticing, okay, I have friends all over the world. I work all over the world. I have lots of European friends. And they keep contacting me and saying, what is happening in your country? And I said, embarrassingly, I don't know what's happening in this country. But they said, like, why are so, and this is a quote I heard yesterday, why are people so immature? If you're asked to do something to protect somebody else's life, why would you choose not to do that? And I said, because on the license plate in New Hampshire, it says, live free or die. And I say, live free and die. This is what's happening. Because my freedom, my license to do anything that I want, is part of our collective shadow. Our individual need for our personal freedom outweighs the collective good. And when other people around the world ask me, I'm saying we are obsessed with personal freedom. There is good to personal freedom, but the obsession of it becomes a shadow. Where is our authority? Where is our security? Is my security in money, power, prestige? Or is my security from my connection to something deeper inside? Learning to love mystery and the unknown. This was Father Hand. He had learned to love mystery and not knowing. It's about changing of consciousness. It's about conversion. Number 10, resisting mass-mindedness. That my identity comes from the collective, not from a personal journey. Recognizing when a time is transitional, and we are in transitional times. There's no doubt about it. Recognizing the signs of growth, holding the tension, finding reconciling symbols, remembering the wisdom of our past. The diagram that I gave you, you see how on the right-hand side there is the persona, Christ in the center, the ego to the right, and the shadow to the left, okay? That's a little picture of the personal unconscious. Hope does not live in the ego. Hope lives in the center, in the two centers. Optimism lives with the ego. Optimism is when I am more in control and I feel I will be successful. Now, there's nothing wrong with optimism, but there's a big difference in the reality between optimism and hope. Hope is non-ego, no self. It comes as gift. Optimism is a viewpoint of the ego. It's a perception that the ego is secure and in charge. So this is just a diagram to show you that where the source of my hope is. And the reason why it's so important to have a personal relationship to our inner world. If we don't have a personal relationship to the inner world, I lose contact with the Christ within. And then all I'm stuck with is my ego, the shadow fears, and my persona that I want to keep intact and I don't want it to change. There are 2 remaining sheets here that I can do quickly, and then we can open it up for conversation. Cynthia Bouget wrote a book on mystical hope. So you can go to her and kind of discover her viewpoint. I think what's important that I use from her is she agrees with me that mystical hope is not tied to a good outcome. Okay? Hope is not tied to an outcome. It's detached from outcomes. It lives on its own. I did a workshop recently that was taped for a program in Sacramento called Contemplative Consciousness in the Age of the Pandemic. And I was trying to work out the relationship between consciousness and conscience. You know, the still small voice within us, that conscience. And what's the relationship between being awakened and having a full conscience? And I've been fascinated in the last few months with Franz Jagerstrada, who was the Austrian Catholic layman who died a martyr's death based upon a refusal to have a pledge to Hitler if he joined the army. And if you read his letters and papers from prison, amazingly, he's in this horrible situation, which he knows he's going to be killed. And yet, if you read his letters and notes, it's filled with hope. Because he attached himself to the experience of truth. There's a relationship between truth and hope. If you're living from your deepest truth, then you know that everything else is passing. Life itself is passing. Everything is passing. So his conscience, his ability to stay with truth rather than all. Now imagine they manipulated him in every possible way to give this up. From his wife, forcing his wife to beg him to come back. His bishop told him not to do this. His priest told him not to do this. He had every pressure against him. And to be able to stand against all of that authority and all of that presence and all of those things, and to believe his conscience above that is a sign of where his rootedness was in hope, because his hope was in God. This is one of the things that the Psalms are continually yelling at us. Hope in God. Trust in God. Don't put your trust in horses. Don't put your trust in political parties. Don't put your trust in the wrong place. Put your trust in God. Because hope has to do with a way of being, not a way of thinking. Hope is an expression of one's full personhood. Optimism is the way we think. Hope is the way we live. It's a very different reality. And is to realize that, you know, time, the limitations of time and space and money and has nothing to do with hope. What hope is a seed buried in the ground, and when the right conditions are there, all of a sudden it comes forward. 2 years ago, I spent about 14 years in California. I love California. And 2 years ago, they had an enormous amount of rain in the wintertime. And they had gone through a long period of drought. And in Southern California, in the Grapevine, right, these mountains outside of LA, there were seeds of poppies that had sat there probably for 10 years without blooming. But when they got the rain, and then the sun came out, and all the conditions were right, billions of poppies popped up. So much, I mean, it painted, literally, it's as if Karita Kent had taken a thing and painted all of the mountains outside of LA. They could see the change in color from space. That's how big it was. Okay, and what was it? was all the conditions were ripe for it to burst. That's what happens. There's a buried seed, and if the conditions are ripe, that you slow down, you meditate, you open up, in the impasse, you don't give up, you keep on going. This mystical hope, it is probably one of the most important things that we need to deal with at this time in history. We don't need to be more optimistic. We need to be more hopeful. Hope is not about attachment to an outcome. Hope is about surviving with meaning. Surviving with meaning. That no matter what happens, you know, if you read Tuesdays with Morrie, right? The story of a person who is gradually failing and the struggles of that. Hope gives us the courage to remain confident with God, with meaning and purpose, with a resilient core that even in the face of great temptation and great darkness, we lean into the truth that God is always with us and God is in us. Then we can become hope providers. When I live with that kind of intensity and awareness, you know what happens? Then I become, along with my directee, one that carries the light from the candle, the Christ candle, and I share it with others, if they are willing to receive it. Because I may be a hope provider, but not everybody may necessarily be willing to take it. And that's the humility that we have to take also. That if I'm an instrument of hope for God, just as they can say no to God, they can say no to me. So I hope you have a little clearer view of transpersonal hope than you did an hour ago. Okay, so I think if Joy wants to come back and begin to coordinate the questions, that would be great.
Thank you, Brother Don. I'll do that. So if you would like to ask a question, just use your raise hand feature. So our first question, Illuminata.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for your talk. I dream quite frequently, and my dreams are extremely unpleasant and violent. And I was wondering if there is a workbook or a guidebook that you can recommend so I can start working with that.
Sure. Probably the best book that for user-friendly is Jeremy Taylor's book, Dream Work.
Okay.
He gives you good, very systematic ways of not only recording dreams, beginning to work with it, the kinds of questions to ask, and to work on it on your own. So Jeremy Taylor, Dream Work.
Thank you. And I had one quick question. In the diagram on the image of the soul, can you briefly explain what the XT is?
Christ. It's just
thank you.
It's the same Christ as the other.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Karen, you're next. Do you want to unmute and ask a question?
Thank you so much for the talk. It was very illuminating and opening. Well, could you give the name again of the person you were referring to at the end? The writings of the letters about conscience. I couldn't hear the name.
Oh, it's the Franz, F-R-A-N-Z. I'll never be able to spell his name. Jagerstrata, Jaeg. Stratter. If you put that in, you'll probably get close to it. He was a martyr in the Second World War who refused to join the army.
And so the name of the collection of letters and papers, is that collected in a volume?
Yes, it's collected in a volume. And he was a simple farmer. He was a lay Franciscan. He had a profound conversion experience. But let me just say this. You know how his conversion came about? Through a dream. And in the dream, okay, he sees a train, a beautiful shining train. And it's coming through the mountains, and it's beautiful and whatever. And all the children and everybody's having a great time, and is coming towards him, and then he realizes there's something wrong. And he hears a voice. This is the voice dream. He hears a voice, and the voice says, the train is going to hell. Because the train was Nazism. And he heard a rush of the wind and a bright light in the room. And through that experience, he discerned that to say yes to joining that train would be an offense against God that he could not do. So now imagine having the courage to base your very life on the belief that this dream spoke to him about God's desire. So I think why I'm moved by this is we're living in a time where people have to move towards a decision of conscience. That, this is not the time for the collective. This is the time for the individual conscience. That, as Thomas More said, I cannot pin my soul on any man's back. And if you, the letters and papers are all written to his wife. And he was beatified a number of years ago. His wife was present. She was 103 at his beatification. And his 3 daughters, all of them in their 70s and 80s, were also there. So it's a fascinating story of conscience in the face of political and religious chaos.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
will look for that. Thanks.
Yeah, it's great. You can get it. I got it on Amazon, of course.
Thank you. So Margaret, you have a question?
Thank you, Joy. Thank you so much. This has just been a wonderful evening and super helpful. So I first just want to quickly say there's a beautiful movie called The Hidden Life about Franz.
Yes.
And I encourage anyone to see it. It is magnificent.
It's a meditation.
It is a meditation. It's just beautiful. And you need to commit maybe almost 3 hours to it.
It's 3 hours, yeah.
It's so I encourage you to watch that if movies are of interest. So Brother Bisson, I'd like to just know two things. One is on the image, the diagram that you shared, It says an image of the soul in the left side. Is this whole image of the soul?
It is an image of how the soul works. In other words, what's contained within it.
And so everything that's there is contained in the soul.
Yes. So you see the Christ, the XT, right?
Mm-hmm.
This goes around the whole thing. So Eckhart, the mystic from the 14th century, spoke about that the Christ within us was the center and the circumference. So it holds everything together. So Christ is within me, yes. The kingdom of God is within. But how does that work? Christ is the center and the circumference. Now within that is our universe. This is the universe in which I live in. Okay? So there's the personal unconscious, personal consciousness, personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. The more you go left, the more things are in the dark. More unconscious we are of them. The more we go right, the more we go towards consciousness. Okay? Now, here's the thing about consciousness. Everybody wants to be conscious because they think it's going to be a blissful experience. And my experience is, to become more conscious, number one, you have to make the material from the unconscious conscious. So you have to go in the dark cellar to pull out the things that you'd rather not see in order to become more conscious. So you have to do shadow work. You have to pull it out, okay? The other thing is about consciousness is, consciousness only happens in conflict. It's like rubbing things to create a spark. It's conflict creates consciousness, not bliss. So we have this kind of twisted view of consciousness. Oh, I want to become so conscious. No, you don't. You want to be consciously asleep. You don't want to be conscious. Because to be conscious is to live with conflict. And by living more with conflict of the opposites, that's when the sparks come. So if you are blissfully unconscious, you're probably blissfully happy. But what, one Jungian analyst described that happiness as happy carrots.
I'm with you.
That's just happy carrots. They're just really happy. Everything makes sense to them, and don't disturb me. I don't want to be disturbed about happy carrot land. I don't want conflict. I don't want to feel different. I just want to get rid of all that kind of stuff. That's not the journey to consciousness.
And so the image of the soul is all of this. It's not just the shadow.
The whole thing. It's the whole picture, right?
Thank you.
They say it's the whole ball of wax.
Whole ball of wax. And then the other quick question is for those of us who might not remember our dreams and have a hard time remembering dreams, do you have any recommendations? And maybe it's in the same book that you already recommended.
Yeah, that would be a helpful book. I also did a CD series on dreams as spiritual practice. How to be able to work with your dreams as if it's spiritual practice. And I've been doing dreams as spiritual practice for 40 years. So to me, dreams is the source of not only revelation, but clarity for discernment. And also signs of individuation, where your growth is happening or where it's not happening. So if you are in constant dialogue with the unconscious, okay, that is, you're going to find everything that is more beautiful than you have imagined and things that are more horrible that you ever want to be associated with. It's all in there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Lyndall, you're next.
Actually, it's Barry.
Hello there.
I'm Lyndall's assistant.
Well, you'll have to rename yourself on Zoom to say Lyndall's assistant.
Yeah.
Assistant into the unconscious.
We just bumped into each other 4 months ago and decided to quarantine together. So, Don, thank you so much. Lyndall has spoken just so wonderfully about you, and I've listened to a couple of your recordings with her, so it's great to connect with you personally.
Good.
So I wanted to just make a couple of comments and try to tie a few things together in my own thinking, and then ask a question
Sure.
to you out of it. So the quote from Jung in that second page of the handout, where he speaks at the end about out of the chaos, islands of contemplation and a sense of justice
Yes.
would possibly be part of this miracle. And then looking at page 7 of the handout with the 15 points that you have listed there about how we can respond to the collective shadow in America.
Yeah.
You know, it seems to me that the old mythology has been very much about the way forward individually is very much focused. It has been focused, I think, exclusively on an inner focus. That if I do enough inner work, I would say that the thinking is, which I don't think is realistic, that somehow magically the world is going to transform just through me doing my personal work.
Right, right.
And so the connection that I see here, I think the new mythology that I'm excited about, that I see emerging, is about that paradox of the inner world and the outer world, that I know myself as I come to know the world more, as I engage more with the world, I come to know more about myself. So the question for me is, given all of that, the 15 points that are listed seem to be very inner focused. And I'm wondering, going back to the quote of Jung, what are your thoughts about how reorienting ourselves toward a sense of justice, toward what liberation in the world means, toward taking a stand against oppression? I guess I'm just wondering your thoughts on why are some of those world-focused notions not also included on that list of how we address the shadow?
That's good. Very good question. See, Jung's insights was to compensate an overdeveloped exteriorization of reality, that reality was only outside. So all of his work was trying to compensate that by saying there's a counterbalance to our inner reality, to our outer work. So he's compensating an overdeveloped extroversion. Okay? Now, the issue is with him is, I did a workshop called Inner Work for Peace and Justice, that I have worked with peace and justice groups who have not done their inner work, who get caught in the same projections, the same inflations, the same dangerous games that happen in any group. So the issue here is, it's not one or the other. It's inner work to transform our outer behavior. Not as a should or a law, but out as personal transformation. So he would say, for instance, like the whole post-Holocaust period was, cultures had adapted to what it meant to be a good citizen or a good person without any sense of interiority. They became obedient to systems and authorities and had lost a sense of personal interiority and conscience. And therefore the containers could not hold the shadow eruption. So what happens is when the shadow blew up, nobody could hold it. And religion itself became as powerless as other forces. So what he was saying is, if we're going to change and evolve as a species, our outer behavior has to come from an inner ethic, not based on rules and collectives, but on a source of recognizing that in my own individuation and my own ethical conscience, I'm moving towards this awakened state. I would suggest that what happens is you need both feet on the ground, one who's rooted in the inner world of self-knowledge and their own realization of their shadow. And the other foot has to be totally grounded in the transformation of social systems based upon reconciliation with the shadow projection that's gone on for centuries. But both feet have to be there. And what I see continually is that we tend to hop on one foot. I'll go to a group, that are all rah, 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 peace and justice, right? They have no sense of their own inner journey, their own blind spots, their own projections, their own inflation, and their depression and hopelessness because they're not in contact with that inner dimension. On the other side, you go to a spiritual group and it's like navel gazing. And instead of inner work, it's narcissism. And instead of transformation, it's inflation. So what I'm always trying to say is, and that's why I had Christian Jungian dialogue, inner and outer, you have to have both feet solidly in place for the future. Otherwise, we get seduced into the same old pattern of left versus right, of this versus that, and unconsciously creating the very system of violence instead of reconciliation. Does that make sense to you?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Because I have seen the dangers of both in those situations.
Thank you. Penny, you're next.
Thank you very much. And thank you again for the presentation and all of your other retreats that you have made available by audio. Thank you so much. I grew up in California. I grew up in Santa Cruz, California. And my question is kind of launches from how I was raised, in that I understand what I'm talking about. I hope I can convey it to you. And that is, in the education that I had there, we were taught to be void of conscience, to be void of guilt, in order to express tolerance and acceptance. And I lived in that, and I lived in a family that was an atheist and also a very wealthy family. So the orientation was me, myself, and I,
right,
to promote that and having the financial means to promote that in myself. So for me, what happened was that I had a series of visions and dreams in which God revealed himself to me and broke through that I would have a conscience. And I had a conscience out of those experiences. But what I meet today, I live right next to Cornell University and work with students there, is that this idea of a conscience, of a shadow self, is vehemently rejected. The education that they've had coming into this was the education I had, was to, in order to have a tolerance, and I won't describe that to you because I know you know what I'm talking about there.
Yes.
Then you must be void of conscience and void of this sense of guilt. How do you address that? Because that is so strong in society.
Yeah, because here's the polarity that our society is being ripped apart with. A secular materialism that you're describing. A secular materialism that sees itself as being tolerant and open because there are no beliefs.
Yes, good.
And also because conscience only means guilt. But they're confused, and Jung, this is where I did this conference, you might be interested in it, on the contemplative consciousness. Jung saw two different forms of conscience. One form of conscience was formed by the collective superego do's and don'ts, rules and regulations. And secular materialists see conscience as simply superego stuff that creates guilt, and you have to get rid of all that.
Right.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
But Jung said that's not the only form of conscience. What he defined as ethical conscience. Ethical conscience has to do with an awareness that there is a deeper voice inside than their ego. And there is a guide. There is a guide of that is not just right and wrong, but what is truthful and not truthful for the person's soul. And what we have is the split between secular materialism and fundamentalist Christianity and fundamentalist Judaism, fundamentalist Islamism, which basically focuses on the superego conscience and is viewed as intolerant because of historical prejudices against various forms of minorities. And what I'm saying is we have to reject both of those.
Right.
Both of them are radically inadequate because they're not soul-driven. Secular materialism just breaks down at some point when the economy falters, when mystery enters their life, when death or other things break through. It doesn't answer the really deep human questions. On the other hand, we have evangelical and Catholic and other forms of fundamentalism in which everything is packaged. And unless you buy into the package, then you're doomed. And it's constricted, and it's oppressive, and it's negative. And that also has to be avoided. Even though they put on the persona of having a conscience, what they really have is a fear of the shadow. So, like, I'm a good person because I go to church and I do these things. And yet, I can be a part of horrific systems that do evil. So in both of those cases, we're not evoking people to mature to become ethical, conscientious adults that are not seduced either by these two fault lines. And I agree with you. I have spiritual directees that are recovering. I'm doing a workshop in, actually, if we can travel, in January at Santa Cruz on spiritual direction for those recovering from toxic religion. But I'm dealing with also people that are recovering from toxic secular materialism that has left them soulless, meaningless. That's just as damaging.
Can you just lead us through maybe a couple of, I'm sorry, I didn't know can you lead us through just a couple of the initial conversations that you began to have with somebody caught in these two dichotomies, either the secular materialism or the...
Because I think what happens is, in today's culture, you're either swept by one of those waves or swept by another wave. The third alternative, I think, is what I was trying to say about these contemplative communities of consciousness. There has to be a third way in which the reality of the soul, the spirit, God, is imbued in a different way than the traditional religious, and certainly responding to a deeper sense of meaning than secular materialism.
Thank you.
We have to form a third way, which I think is happening.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And thank you, Brother John. I'm so sorry. I was just going to let you know we're at 8:30. So
yes, I think we're beyond 8:30. So do we want to?
Well, with that, I think the best way we can express our gratitude to you, Don, is to say that you have been a real provider of hope for us this evening. And I hope
Thank
that
you.
people will continue to stay connected with you through your lectures, through our zip code contemplation groups, etc. So thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Blessings to everybody.
Thank you.